I'm coming. Judge, I'm coming.
Come on.
In a way, all the major themes of Ford come together in The Sun Shines Bright, and you get what comes closest to, I think, Ford's own idealized image of himself in the figure of Judge Priest. And in many respects, I mean, even down to him being an alcoholic.
Mind you, not as an indulgence, merely to get my heart started.
And being a kind of old-fashioned person who nonetheless has a kind of progressive relationship to his community, and who's a patriarchal figure of a kind.
Judge, we came here to hang that there boy. Now, don't you be going ahead and doing something you're going to feel sorry for.
Beaker, I aim to conduct myself so that you'll vote for me come next Tuesday. Then get out of our way. We'll all vote for you.
Yeah.
Hey, Judge, of course we will. If that's the price of your support, I won't pay it. Come on, let's tear down the jail.
Yeah.
I'll kill the first man that crosses that line.
But I think what's really important, I think, in The Sun Shines Bright is a really protracted procession, especially the funeral procession. It's a funeral for a prostitute, and it interrupts the election parade and celebration of the so-called progressive candidate, who is the villains in this film, running against Judge Priest, who's up for re-election. And suddenly he falls in with this funeral procession where the prostitutes are in a wagon, and he joins in, and then one member after another in the community sort of joins in, even though they're being scoffed at because of this scarlet woman, who's being treated with this deference. And by the end of the procession, it's a very slow, stately sequence. There are like 100 people. It's like the gathering of, really, in essence, the entire community. And it's been pointed out, which is very interesting, is there doesn't seem to be any actual clergyman in this community. We never see one. We have instead a kind of secular clergyman who is even represented in the name Judge Priest, who's a judge but who also becomes a priest, and he's the one who actually gives the sermon at the funeral, and quoting from Scripture and so on.
He looked those accusers in the eye, and this is what he said. He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her.
Then what you have following this is you go back to the election, in which you again have processions of various people turning up to vote, including the people who Judge Priest stopped from lynching, like this black youth. And then he finally it's reminded by Stepin Fetchit, his servant, that he actually hasn't voted himself. So he goes in and breaks a tie, winning the election. And then you have a kind of segue over the song playing of Dixie to the final sequence, when you have virtually everybody in the entire town watching past Judge Priest's mansion in tribute. And this includes the temperance ladies who's been opposed to him. It includes the people, again, who are in the lynch mob, who he prevented, who are even carrying a sign saying, "He saved us from ourselves." And, of course, this is, again, John Ford's ideal image of himself because of what he was trying to do in his films. And you have the whites separated from the blacks. You also even have a division of the sexes. You have male, marching in formation, and female. And it goes on and on and on and on. And it's quite complex because it's a celebration, and yet it is incredibly sad. I think it's the idea of, in a sense, stubborn, cantankerous individuality, and how this becomes a kind of glorious but tragic trait.
Ja, her lever jeg som eremit, glemt, udslettet, og det passer mig. Jeg behøver ensomhed og frihed.
Dreyer identified, of course, with Gertrud, even though he saw her flaws. And, of course, Ford is attentive to the flaws of Judge Priest, not just that he's an alcoholic, but that he's in a way a kind of a sad figure. Gertrud is a kind of sacrificial person who sacrifices her life to the idea of love and winds up completely alone as a consequence.
Gang imellem leger med.
Jamen søde Gertrud, kærligheden alene kan da ikke udfylde en mands tilværelse. Det vil da være latterligt for et mandfolk.
Måske ville det være latterligt. Der ser du selv, hvor lidt jeg betyder for dig. Og hvor ubetydeligt det tomrum bliver, når jeg nu går.
And Judge Priest, of course, is the arbiter of justice, who kind of brings a kind of peace to the community and everything, and yet he is utterly alone, even when the entire community comes out to pay him tribute. Paradoxically, I think both films are tragic in feeling despite, or maybe even because, they both could have what could be described as overdetermined happy endings. And both films concentrate at great length on highly ceremonial tributes paid to old men for their life's work. Literally, both films, you could say, virtually end with figures retreating through doorways. In Ford's film, 2 separate doorways, in eerie images that strongly suggest mortality and the ultimate isolation of death. And this is even heightened at the end of The Sun Shines Bright, when one of the rooms that Judge Priest passes through, the lights go out in it. It's quite an eerie effect. I think both of these endings can be summarized by a certain Fordian formula, which is often used in relation to its films, which is the idea of victory and defeat, even though they're quite different, I think. Gertrud's victory and her defeat both remain off-screen in the minimalist severity of Dreyer's final shot of a closed door. Whereas both Judge Priest's victory and the extreme pathos of his isolation, which implies a kind of defeat, are spelled out directly in Ford's conclusion, albeit made more complex and ambiguous by Ford, intercutting between Judge Priest and Ashby, with Lucy Lee at Priest's front gate, with Lucy Lee silently restraining Ashby from going on and, greeting Priest. And Ford then records their off-screen exit in long shot as they walk past Jeff, Stephen Fetchit, in profile in front of Priest's mansion, playing his harmonica on the front steps. In other words, both victory and defeat are represented but not shown. First in our, in our interminable view of the door that closes behind Gertrud after she waves goodbye to her friend Axel. Whereas intimations of both defeat and victory are expressed successively in Ford's final shots. Judge Priest in his apotheosis as a paternal hero, being celebrated by his entire community, whites and blacks alike. And then he says,
Ted, I gotta take my medicine. I gotta get my heart started.
Which is a running gag, which means that he must once again retreat to his bottle like a helpless infant. And turning his back on his community, which also in this gesture of Lucy Lee chooses to leave him in his isolation, he marches stoically towards his lonely death, a kind of defeat, while his loyal servant, also alone yet facing the same community, celebrates his master's apotheosis, which is a kind of victory.